Nigeria is not running out of food, but millions of people cannot afford to eat food. Nigeria potentially could feed the whole of Africa. There's so much land, there's so much to be produced because the land in Nigeria is so rich that some countries in the world have in the past come to Nigeria and even some parts of Africa to come and pick some of the products that are indigenous to Nigeria, and they are thriving in those countries. But in spite of this wealth, 2024 food prices surged. Some years in the past, 25 million Nigerians were already in acute food insecurity by late 2024, and projections suggest that this could rise to nearly 35 million people during the 2026 lean year. This is not just about food. It is a story about policy, conflict, survival, and neglect. My name is Rimamnde Shawulu. This is The Other Side. Now, let's begin with what we know. Not speculations, not politics, but data. The CADA harmonized framework shows a sharp deterioration in Nigeria. 10.6 million people are in acute food insecurity as at 2023. 25.1 million people in late 2024. Over 30 million people projected in 2025. And now up to between 34 and 35 million people expected in 2026. And at the same time, inflation exploded. Data from the National Bureau of Statistics shows, one, inflation climbed above 34% in 2024, and food inflation peaked at nearly 40%. Something even more revealing, cost of a healthy diet, what it takes for one adult to eat properly, is from 858 naira per day in early 2024 to nearly 1,500 naira by December 2024. That is not just inflation. This is from survivor, and the impact is visible in the most vulnerable populations. According to UNICEF, over 2.5 million Nigerian children are now acutely malnourished. This is the crisis in numbers, but numbers don't explain the causes. In 2023, Nigeria launched one of the most ambitious reform agendas in its history. Perhaps not the first time. The government removed fuel subsidies. It unified exchange rates. It tightened monetary policies. The International Monetary Fund describes these reforms as necessary, designed to stabilize the economy and correct long-standing distortions. And in theory, they make sense. But in practice, timing matters, and sequencing matters even more. When fuel subsidies were removed, transport costs surged. When the naira depreciated, the cost of imported food, fertilizer, and farm inputs skyrocketed. And when interest rates rose, farmers struggled to access credit. The result, a perfect transmission mechanism. This was worsened by the decision of the government to open the borders and import more products, making it difficult for farmers who had spent so much money to recoup their money from the falling prices of grains and other food products. And as well, several young people who had gone to the banks to collect limited loans from loan organizations or community organizations or from individuals to go into agriculture have found themselves today unable to pay these loans, and many of them have been sent to jail. So while reforms aimed at long-term stability, they produce short-term shock, and for millions of Nigerians, that shock translated into hunger. But policy alone does not explain this crisis. There's a second, more brutal factor: insecurity. According to the FAO, conflict remains a primary driver of food insecurity in Nigeria. Across the Northeast, Northwest, and the Middle Belt, farmers are displaced, fields are abandoned, markets are disrupted. Over 3.4 million people are internally displaced. The World Food Programme warns that in some parts of Borno State, people are already facing emergency and catastrophic hunger conditions. This changes the equation completely, because even if food exists, people cannot produce it, cannot transport it, and sometimes cannot even access it. Of course, there has been, in some intellectual cycles and in some development cycles, the third force, that is climate. In 2024, floods affected over 1.3 million Nigerians, destroying crops and displacing communities. In 2025, the FAO warned of 1. Delayed rains, low average rainfall in parts of the north, and severe dry spells. This creates a dangerous cycle. Flood destroys crops, drought reduces yields, supplies fall, prices rise. And when that happens in an already fragile system, the impact multiplies. This is why the crisis becomes systemic, because these factors do not act independently. They reinforce each other. Inflation reduces purchasing power. Insecurity reduces supply. Climate shocks reduce output. Together, they create a feedback loop. Less food, higher prices, less access, more hunger. And the dangerous part? Displacement forces people into markets at the exact moment markets become unaffordable. The IMF confirms this dynamic. Inflation surged due to currency depreciation, subsidy removal, and supply constraints. This is not one crisis, it is a convergence of crises. So, where does this go from? The World Bank suggests that poverty may begin to decline in 2026 as inflation stabilizes. But that is conditional. Things improve only if food inflation continues to fall, security improves, farmers return to land, climate shocks are managed, and social protection expands. But if any of these fail, especially security, the crisis deepens. Projections already warn up to 34.7 million Nigerians could face acute food insecurity in 2026. That is not recovery, that is escalation. Nigeria's food crisis is not caused by a single failure. It is the result of timing, pressure, vulnerability. Reforms created shock, conflict disrupted production, climate reduced supply, and together they push millions into hunger. The question now is no longer, how did this happen? The question is, can Nigeria stabilize its economy, reduce insecurity, and restore security and protect its most vulnerable before the crisis becomes permanent and Nigeria begins to look like Ethiopia and Somalia when they had the devastating famine some years ago? Please subscribe to our weekly insights on Nigeria's politics and democracy. And don't forget to click on that button to join our YouTube to join our channel as a member. Again, my name is Rimamnde Shawulu. This is The Other Side.